I know that I was a very angry young man in my teens. And I remember my father taking me aside at one stage and said that if you allow such anger to continue, it'll eat you up and give Hitler a posthumous victory. And that was fortunately at a time when I was just starting my journey with Hasidus. And the coincidence, which of course there isn't any, um, of being able to understand myself much better and being able to recognize the dynamics within took me on the journey which I still continue today, which is to better understand the interface between mind and emotion.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Hannah Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have a fascinating guest. His name is Rabbi Laibl Wolf, Rabbi Dr. Laibl Wolf. He is an author, a lawyer, a psychologist, a rabbi, he holds many different positions, and he's also has been instrumental in helping thousands of people discover how Hasidus can be used in practical life. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi Wolf.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm really excited for this interview. I'm really excited to hear about your work. First, let's hear a little about your story. I understand that you were born. Let's talk a little about your childhood.
Okay,
And I,
certainly. I was born in Krakow, Poland, actually, straight
wow.
after the war. My parents are Holocaust survivors. They were actually married immediately after the war, and I was born in Poland. I was 2 years old when my parents emigrated to Australia, so that they could be as far away from the Khurban as possible.
Mm.
And of course, like many of the survivors, they came only with their shirts on their back. Um, my father and mother had very fascinating and horrific stories from the Shoah. My father was watched his parents and siblings murdered in front of his eyes by a Nazi officer. He was able to escape. He was 17 at the time. He was studying at the Radomsky Yeshiva, who was a Radomsky Chassid, and eventually was caught and put into a labor camp and managed to smuggle in a gun, and three of them shot their way out of the labor camp. And my father was a partisan in the forest for the duration of the war. Um,
Wow.
my, so it was quite horrific. And my mother was fortunately hidden in an attic of a non-Jewish farmhouse. The attic was only 3.5 feet high, and they would lie prone, she and her parents, in that attic for 19, 20 hours a day. And only in the middle of the night, they were allowed down just to stretch and eat. And they spent several years just like that. So I remember as a child listening to my parents' screams in their dreams, in their sleep, and I can just imagine the horrific memories that they were re-witnessing vicariously through their imagination and dream state.
Wow.
So that was my
Did
earliest recollections.
did they speak to you about their experiences? Did you grow up hearing about their stories?
My mother spoke a lot about it. My father didn't speak about it till the last years of his life. He
Mm.
passed away at the age of 93. In the last few years, he spoke about it, but there was a recording that he made for the Yad Vashem, and
Mm.
it was a 3-hour recording, so it was pretty full on.
And how do you think that affected you, growing up to parents who had gone through that?
I think it affected me quite profoundly. I know that I was a very angry young man in my teens. And I remember my father taking me aside at one stage and said that if you allow such anger to continue, it'll eat you up and give Hitler a posthumous victory.
Mm.
And that was fortunately at a time when I was just starting my journey with Hasidus through my mashpia, Reb Zalman Serebriansky, alav shalom. And the coincidence, which of course there isn't any, um, of being able to understand myself much better and being able to recognize the dynamics within took me on the journey which I still continue today, which is to better understand the interface between mind and emotion, and to be able to assist people to navigate a much better lifetime for themselves.
Hmm. And how did so you said this was at the beginning of your journey into Hasidus. What pushed you? What motivated you to start that journey?
Um, I would like to say dramatically it was something that occurred within me, but it didn't as such. My father was very close with Reb Zalman. Reb Zalman was like the person who took my father, under his wing when they first came to Australia. My father being a young man then of 23, 24. Reb Zalman was already a mature age individual from Russia that the Friedrich Rebbe had sent several families to Australia. So I was familiar with Reb Zalman, and apparently my father asked Reb Zalman in that stage of my life if he would in, intervene in my thought processes. And Reb Zalman challenged me to a weekly shiur, which I had no choice but to accept, given my father's relationship with him. But it did introduce me to a whole new world, which I'm still traversing on.
And what did it introduce you to? Can you elaborate on that? Like what difference did
Well,
it make in your life? And I know you use those teachings to help people to
yes,
really completely
yes.
change their lives.
If I use terminology which I've since evolved, I would say that I had been experiencing Jewishly a horizontal life, which means along the plane of information, flatness, more and more knowledge, which of course is necessary. I'm not degrading it in any way, not denigrating it in any way. But I think what Reb Zalman and Hasidus did was provided me with a dimension of vertical Judaism, which means depth and meaning behind the one piece of information, which I think opens up a whole vista for a person to be able to recognize the depth and quality and richness of every single aspect of their life at every moment. Now, I didn't define it in my early days as such. I'm speaking retrospectively in many ways, but that's what, in fact, I think attracted me.
So can you give us a practical example? Like how does that, you're talking about a very deep knowledge that's affecting you in a vertical way
Yeah,
that you're internalizing, and that internalization affects every aspect of your life. Can you give us, like, as a teenager, how that changed you from that angry
yes,
child or that angry teenager to
yes.
what did it do?
Well, for example, one of the early aspects that Reb Zalman took me through was to understand what's the nature of ka'as, what's the nature of anger. Obviously, there was a overt kind of symptom that I was exhibiting. And he began to explain to me how different elements of mind, Chochmah B'Dadas, impinge and guide Chesed Gvur Tiferes, etc., the emotional midos, etc. And then introduced me to the fascination of the different elements in each, which to me seemed like learning to play the scales of music, being able to understand each note and how they combined with each other to provide the beauty of sound, of combined sound. And that's what we're doing all the time within. We're creating moments of great symphony by taking the various attributes and spheros and etc., and being able to, if we do it consciously, to keep creating the wonderment of the moment and optimizing it. Now, I know I'm speaking rather vaguely, but when it applies to anger, for example, at the root of anger is strong emotion. And emotion doesn't possess direction, it doesn't possess wisdom. It's raw energy. It requires obviously the compass bearing of mind to be able to guide emotions to be appropriate in any one moment. So when you recognize that anger is simply a very bad product that we manufacture for egotistic reasons, ultimately for self expression in a negative way, and when we ask ourselves, what is anger all about? Anger is an attempt to control and dominate the other or the environment somehow to serve our own purpose, my wishes, my wants, and the like. So when we start recognizing that anger isn't an inevitability, but it's a product which, if I slow the process down, which is how I teach people to ask themselves, what are the elements that of the spherot, of the attributes that I'm applying at this moment? To what extent is my emotion being self-serving, or is it being guided in a wise manner? Slowly, step by step, you can be able to reformulate the manufacturing process and produce the strong emotion in a positive direction rather than negative direction.
Hmm.
Emotions are natural, but not all emotions are the natural, innate, built-in hardware that God gave us. There are emotions that we produce by combining them, and sometimes wrongly and ineffectively, anger being one of them.
So I think you're saying like taking different aspects of your dispositions and bringing it together like you would do in a symphony, different notes of the personality and
Absolutely.
bringing it together. So
Absolutely.
ho so I'm wondering, like, I know you're also you're a psychotherapist. How is that different than psychology? Like, how did you apply it differently than the study of psychology?
Well, you see, when you take the word psychology, what we're talking about is a Western uh, understanding of the physiological workings of the brain, producing perceptions of reality, of mind and emotion. Now, in the West, it's very, very underdeveloped. When we speak about psychology today, we're speaking about so many approaches, many competing with each other, and very vague in many ways. To speak about psychology is not to speak about mathematics or scientific data, it's people's perceptions of what the mind does and emotion does. Uh,
Mm.
and even then, they don't in psychology don't even speak of two different streams of consciousness, like mind consciousness and emotion consciousness. It all gets very mixed up, and hence you have Freudian approaches and post-Freudian approaches and more pragmatic approaches. Hasidus is also a psychology in that sense. It explains the nature of people's motivations and operations. So, in a very big word, psychology, yes, Hasidus fits into that. But Hasidus, of course, is much more than just a psychology, which is able to explain human behavior and human speech and human thought. It also allows us to understand our place in creation, our place in the cosmos, our
Mm.
relationship, and deepen our understanding of all relationships, which is the core of happiness of life.
Hmm. Did you become a happier person when you started studying Hasidus?
No, inevitably, 100%. It wasn't overnight, though. It's only now, as I look back in the prism of the past, that I can recognize that. You never really note it as you're going through the process, but you can measure it subsequently. And the answer is absolutely. And that process hasn't stopped. I think I'm becoming an increasingly happier person as I live on and on. And please God, bis 120.
Is that your goal? Is that your goal when
Absolutely.
st
Yes, I want to
Mhm.
live as long as I can.
Right. Absolutely. Um, I, I I know you did a lot of, you were doing a lot of learning, you were doing a lot of studying, and you took a path that's kind of different than most people. Most people are either a rabbi or a psychologist or a lawyer, not all three, fields
Sure.
together, expertise in all three fields.
Yes.
What motivated you to do
Yeah.
all to balance all three?
Okay. So it was not a grand plan, I assure you. In fact, the Rebbe in Yechidus pointed out to me personally that I have a restless soul. Those are the words that the Rebbe used to me. The Rebbe didn't compliment me on that or criticize me on that; just made me aware of that. And I think that as I look back, that's clearly what those particular arenas of study demonstrated. I had leanings in so many directions, and I followed them up. Um, at some point, I decided very clearly that academia is very, very nice and exciting and self serving, but the purpose of the neshama being reincarnated into the world isn't just to aggrandize oneself, but to be able to reach out and share with others. And I guess that's where the rabbinical side or the Chassid side of me started to play a more dominant role.
Uh-huh. Interesting. It's interesting because I would think, like, I think of a lawyer and a psychologist as such different kind of brains.
Very. So I'll tell you, what you don't know is, to complicate it further, is that I actually did 3 years of architecture first. Um,
Well,
before shifting to law. I didn't like architecture for all sorts of reasons, and my parents said, look, my parents being Holocaust survivors, you've got to have a profession, you've got to survive. So they said, be a lawyer, and you could be a lawyer in our family business. So I did law. Without great love, without great admiration for law or interest in law as such. But once I started, I finished it. But my passion clearly became clear to me that I was interested in how people respond to the radical act of living, and to try to
Mm.
explain how they do that.
Well, I guess architecture makes a little sense because you're figuring out how the whole architecture of the soul,
Yes,
the
yes,
whole
yeah,
building up. Right.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
I do tend to have a methodical kind of mind, and I like to tear things apart to their basics and see how we can put it back together again.
Hmm. And do you see yourself as a restless soul still today, till today?
Yes, I think so. It's somehow part of my nature. I can try to alter that, but I don't see any reason at this stage of life for me to change that. And I guess one of the aspects of being a restless soul is I enjoy travel and keep traveling and sharing and teaching in different continents. And I guess that's the way that it's becoming expressed today.
Yeah, I think a restless soul is very positive. You don't just sit still. You just want to keep on doing more and growing more, which seems to
Yeah.
be a hallmark of what you are, right?
Yeah, it can be. Of course, it can do the opposite. You can never finish anything, but at the same time, yeah, we've got each power and ability to turn everything and make things right.
Hmm. Absolutely. Wow. So I understand that at one point the Rebbe wrote you a letter. You wanted to continue on in yeshiva. Can you tell us what the Rebbe told you in that letter?
Okay, there were actually 2 stages. Before I get to that letter, when I first married, um, I was still in law school, and I didn't want to stop my Jewish studies. So Reb Zalman, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva Gedolah at the time, gave me permission to spend half days studying at the yeshiva. So in a sense, I was probably the first Kolonic in Australia because I was married at the
Mm.
time, and that was the first stage. And then I received from a letter from the Rebbe immediately after I finished law, where the Rebbe asked me if I would come to the United States and work with academic youth. That was the Rebbe's lashon, the Rebbe's expression. And we didn't know what academic youth meant, what the Rebbe meant. And we asked the Maskirus, who asked the Rebbe, and
The
the Rebbe,
secretary.
the secretaries, yes, I'm sorry, the secretaries of the Rebbe. And the answer was to work at universities with Jewish students.
Hmm.
Now, this was a period where Chabad houses had just begun a few years prior to that. There was the Chabad house in California, in Los Angeles, in Gailey Avenue at the time, etc. I think that might have been the only one at the time. I can't quite recall.
So what
Um,
was this like the 60s, the 70s?
Late 60s, yes,
Late
68,
60s.
69, yeah. Um, so that wasn't really an option because it was one single place and wasn't clear that they wanted Hasidim to come and work there. So the Rebbe asked me to look into beyond Chabad, and I discovered there's an organization called Hillel that provides students with facilities. Now, in those days, Hillel was a very different organization than today. It was mainly made up of rabbis of all different denominations, mind you, but it was a very beautiful fraternity and brotherhood and Avos Yisrael amongst the Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox rabbis. And I would be the first Chabadnik if I were to join that.
Mm.
And when I contacted them, they were at a stage where they really wanted to internationalize, and therefore to have the thought of having an Australian was very good for them. And they gave me an option of 3 postings. And I sent to the Rebbe the options I had, and the Rebbe underlined Madison, Wisconsin. It was one of the 3. And so my wife and I and our 3-month-old first child trekked across to Madison, Wisconsin, which I'd never heard of before. First time I've seen snow. And that was the beginning. And I guess I was the first shaliach, therefore, there in Madison, Wisconsin. And that was my beginning in terms of that. Coming back to your question, many years later, having not really felt that I had completed my studies at yeshiva fully, never been to kollel, etc., I asked the Rebbe whether I could take a year off to learn. This was really, I was in my 30s at that stage. And the Rebbe sent me a very strong letter. And he said, the Rebbe's words are, it's Zman Milchama, it's the time of war. And in the wartime, a good soldier is not allowed to leave the front line. And that ended that little restless mood.
So for those who are listening, what does that mean? What does that mean that it's a time of war?
It's a time of spiritual war. It's a time where assimilation of Jewish peoplehood is at a height, where there is a need to be able to enter into, if you will, the Rebbe's army, of being able to stem assimilation and to enrich the quality and content of people's Jewish lives, and that this was such an important role, given that it takes only a small light to be able to get rid of darkness. So you need to have a minimum critical mass of people involved. And so remember, at that time, Chabad was a small critical mass. It wasn't like today where it's a dominant worldwide movement. I remember in those days when I was working out there that federations, which was something I didn't know in Australia, were really the dominant community organization, and they were always embarrassed to refuse Chabadniks, to local Chabad shaliach, to join their roof body, because Chabad is sort of an old world, old-fashioned kind of backward movement that they didn't want us part of them. And now when I look today, everyone's wanting the Chabad to be part of them. The Chabad's the dominant, strong movement that's successful in ways that no other movement has been. How in the short space of my lifetime I've seen this swing of perception of the Rebbe's work.
Wow, that's incredible. Were you disappointed when you got that answer from the Rebbe? Like, what was your reaction?
No, I was extremely happy. Of course, it fitted into my nature, another continent, another place, etc. My wife, of course, wasn't as enthusiastic as I was, having a 3-month-old child. And my wife wasn't raised in a Chabad background. In fact, the father was a Talmud Chacham from Vilna, who lost his whole family and came to Australia, and he had lost a wife and child in Vilna during the war, and he came to Australia and met my wife's mother here, who was also she spent 4 years in Auschwitz and survived. She was a Mengele experiment, which made it even more dramatic, and yet she had 2 children, my wife and her sister, which was absolutely miraculous. Etc. So for my wife, it was very difficult to get up and go, having been raised in more closed family setting, and to be thrown into Madison at the time, which was probably one of the most wildest campuses in America. Everything was happening in Madison, Wisconsin. When I got there, 3 days later, a group of anarchists called the Weathermen bombed the physics building, killing 2 students. And every other afternoon, the students and the police were at it because of occupation of administration buildings and the like. And I was right in the middle of that. That was my first taste of tear gas. And
incredible. Did you learn anything from that experience?
Yes, something that holds me in good stead in today's world of anti-Semitic protests that you and I are living in under at the moment, to some extent, or to a greater extent. And that is that people join movements for all sorts of various reasons, many of which are absolutely nothing to do with the virtue of the ideology or anything, but just enjoy the fun and camaraderie and the thought of belonging, which plays such a significant role in humanity, in human beings. And if we understood that, we'd understand better what media is actually doing to, unfortunately, upset the natural growth path of 10-year-olds to 16-year-olds, which
Mm.
cause them to quest for this kind of belonging, which they have not had the interrelationship except through the medium of technology, of a phone, of a smartphone, etc. Another discussion altogether.
So you're saying it was a lack of belonging that people are looking for.
That's, I think, a number one factor. I think it was Harvard University's study of happiness over 88 years. It was a long study, and the results came out only 4 years ago as to what are the most significant factors that contribute to happiness. And the single factor that was head and shoulders above any other was relationships, quality of
Mm.
relationships. And I think it's the quality of relationships that have been most upset by the smartphone and what's happening to youngsters between those ages of 10 and 16. Yeah.
Wow. Totally unrelated to that, I understand at what point in your life you met the Dalai Lama. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, sure. I didn't go out to meet Dalai Lama. What happened was, at the time, we were back in Melbourne, and I was working as a Chabad shliach on campus here, and I was also
So you left Wisconsin. You were there for
yeah,
just a few years in
I
Wisconsin?
was in I was for 4 years in Wisconsin, then I was for 4 years in Hofstra University in New York in Long Island, and
Mm.
then my wife was really missing home, and
Mm.
she wrote to the Rebbe. Not I didn't write to the Rebbe; she wrote to the Rebbe, poured her heart out, and the Rebbe's answer was, almost to me, in view of your wife's loneliness and I can't remember the exact lashon, but the Rebbe says, I withdraw my previous opinion, which was for us to stay
Mm.
in America,
America.
and leave it up to you, not me, but to my wife and myself. And we went back to Australia at that point and continued from a new base in Australia. So,
Wow.
coming back to your question, so I was teaching a course at Melbourne University in comparative Judaism and Buddhism, of all things,
Mm.
because I had worked out that at that time there were so many Jewish students and younger people questing for meaning and finding what they thought was meaning in the Buddhist teachings, and especially in ashrams and the like. I thought that if I could somehow use the campus and the university as a means of pointing them back to Yiddishkeit, that would be a good thing to do. So I finagled my way into becoming a senior lecturer there. Um,
Mhm.
Now, I had a large group of students. There were over 120 in my annual classes. I taught for 4 years there. But one year, there were 3 Buddhist students dressed in robes who came regularly every week to my class. They never spoke to me. And then at that time in that year, the Dalai Lama was visiting Australia. So I want to make
Mm.
it clear, I didn't trek out to where he was. He trekked out to where I was. And anyway, I get a call one day from his entourage saying that the Dalai Lama would like to meet with me. And I asked why. And apparently, these students had mentioned that there's this strange rabbi teaching our stuff. And it obviously piqued his interest. Anyway, so that resulted in the meeting with the Dalai Lama, which I first discussed with my chevra, with my colleagues, should I, shouldn't I, etc., was decided yes, because the purpose of the visit would be to tell the Dalai Lama to send his Jewish followers back to Yiddishkeit. That would be the ostensible purpose of meeting with the Dalai Lama.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I figured anyway it'd be good for me also. My standing amongst Jew boos would be elevated in that way. So I got two people in my community, two fellow Chabadniks, to accompany me. I had to look important, so I had my entourage. And I
Right.
told one of them to smuggle in a little camera and at an appropriate moment get a shot of me with the Dalai Lama, because that would really
Wow.
allow me
Yeah.
entry point into wherever. We come to the entry of, he's still staying at a hotel owned by a Jewish person. And as we enter, what is it that we see? A big tripod with a huge camera. The Dalai Lama wants a photo with the rabbi,
Of you. Wow.
which was
Is
very
that
interesting.
something? Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, he wanted we spent 2 hours together, and he wanted to know two things. One, how to survive a golus, an exile, because he said his people were now entering into an exile. They had been for 60, 70 years at that point. And he knew that we, the Jewish people, were the experts in surviving exile. So he wanted to understand the dynamics of that. And the other thing he said he wanted to understand better is family, Jewish family, what made it distinctive. And he had heard about how wonderful Jewish family is, and he wanted to know some of the features that were characterizing Jewish family. So those were that was my little tete-a-tete with the Dalai Lama.
That's incredible. That's so interesting. And what did you tell him? Like how did he take to what you said?
Well, on the first point of survival, I said simply, it's the Torah, and that
Mm,
as far as the world is concerned, the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and we spoke about that that particular feature that could hold peoplehood together with commonality and direction of purpose of life. Now, in terms of the Jewish family, it became a little bit difficult for me, because here we are living at a time when family breakdown amongst Jewish people and assimilation is not very different from wider community. So
mm.
I guess I had to, in the expression, fib a little and say all the wonderful virtues of the Jewish family, Shabbos and Kashrus, and being able to treat youngsters in a much more adult manner, even though in society they're not necessarily treated as such. Anyway, we discussed the various things, but then came the moment when I said, right, now I have to put it to the Dalai Lama, would you please tell the Jewish followers to be true to themselves and go back to their roots? Now, I know that there were anecdotal stories about the Dalai Lama telling Jews to go back to their sources.
Right.
Not so, not in the
Not so.
slightest. Forget that.
No,
The Dalai Lama
really.
answered me and he said, Buddhism is good for the Jewish people.
Really? Oh, wow.
So all these things that we'd like to believe and spread so quickly and may not be true
Right.
at all is true here as well, unfortunately.
Wow. So you weren't able to convince him in that one.
No.
Yeah. Wow.
But
Interesting.
it did give me a much higher profile. The photos did come out, both at his end
Yeah.
and my end. And
Yeah.
I was invited in many Buddhist centers, and inevitably, half of the people were Jewish in every one of them.
Right. Hmm. Wow. Well, I mean, related to that, I understand that you started mindfulness way before it became popular. Nowadays everyone's talking about meditation, mindfulness. You were speaking about Jewish meditation years before that. What pushed you in that direction?
It wasn't a personal interest. It was when the Rebbe gave that celebrated sikha in 1979, where he spoke about meditation and called for people who were involved in helping in the helping world, be they rabbis, be they doctors, be they psychiatrists, etc., to develop formats of meditation which would be clean of avodah zarah, of idol worship. For example, there are many schools of meditation, especially from the East, that utilized Avodah Zarah terminologies and practices. And at that point, I said to myself, well, I'm working with young people, let me investigate it also. So I read up about this was before mindfulness. Meditation became popular 2 decades earlier, and started to adapt um, Judaism to what appear to be outward formats of meditative practice, and to alloy them, bring them together. And it was very, very popular. And yes, people did take to it because superficially it was attractive. Meditation was the buzzword, and here we have Jewish meditation, etc. So I began, and I always sent to the Rebbe copies of notes that I was going to utilize. And each time the Rebbe responded with a tach, that he sees this favorably, etc. So I kept up with that. And then later on, when the term mindfulness started to come into being, it was evolved by a Jewish Buddhist psychotherapist, I think a psychologist actually, etc. And I began to look at it, and I could see that mindfulness was really an aspect of meditation. And then it became clear to me that the words mindfulness and meditation have no exact meaning whatsoever. And they can get away with murder, doing lots and lots of things and calling it mindfulness and calling it meditation, and everyone would swallow it very, very glibly. And was just as long as you put out those words, you got an audience. And it's ultimately
Interesting.
simply chachma, bina, and da'as. It's ultimately the capacity, even a very limited aspect of chassidus in terms of more the da'as orientation, the focusing, the concentration, etc., and the like. And there are many spin-offs. And when I started to teach the broader chassidus involved in what we commonly call meditation and mindfulness, it blew many of the Jewish kids' minds, and they started to become intrigued and entered into a better study of Chassidus.
Interesting. Very fascinating. So, at what point did you realize that you could use Hasidus to make such personal transformations in people's lives?
From the word go, I must admit that always, since my studies with Reb Zalman and in Yeshiva, etc., it was clear to me that this was like an answer to people's understanding of reality. And I was intrigued why it was that these highly sophisticated philosophers of the past and psychologists of the present were still actually involved in what I call Kinderspielen. They were playing games at a very inferior level to something that was we had so much clarity over, that ever since then my real work in life is to broaden people's horizons and to recognize, Jewish people by and large, allow them to recognize that here in our backyard we've got something which is far superior as tools to be able to engage in life with.
So, if there was, let's say, 5 minutes that a person could do something in terms of personal rectification or personal transformation, what would you suggest that they do in terms of, using Hasidus in their lives, making it practical?
I'll give you an answer which is, I think you might consider rather indirect. I would say to the person, I'd like you to go to a hospital today and visit a patient. Now, what's that got to do with your question? The answer is we've always learned from the outside in, not from the inside out, which means na'aseh v'nishma. We will do it, and then we'll come to a deeper understanding of it. But without the doing of it, the understanding doesn't come. So when the person would tell me that they have visited a hospital, because I always made sure I had an appointment for them to come back to me, the question I would ask is, how did you feel about that? And inevitably, there was a feeling of fulfillment, a feeling of some sense of elation that they were able to make a person's life better for a few moments, that whatever it might have been the case. And then we start to look at what is the nature of our emotional life, and what is the singular factor? And the singular factor is one of contribution, or if I take a more sophisticated look, it's taking the binary system of life, which is dualities, everything comes in twos, and joining them and making them one, of which the most powerful is love. Love is two people internally coming together closer and closer. And the deeper and more honest the closeness is, the more happiness and fulfillment is derived from that. And that's true in everything of life, whether it's knowledge. The more you understand something and come closer to it and bridge the distance, the more fulfilling is the process of learning. So from there, in other words, what I'm saying to you is, I try
It's
not to
12:30.
begin academically. I try not to begin, okay, let's understand what the structure of the human psyche is. But I like to try to begin with the practical life experiences, which verifies that what I'm going to share with you has very wonderful outcomes. So that becomes motivation.
So you show how the positive side of it, the practical positive side of it.
Yeah, the practical positive side, but always very, very positive aspects to begin with. So, if I can give you another example, which may be more understandable, I get people coming to me saying that they wake up 3 o'clock in the morning and they can't go back to sleep. What can I do for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I certainly can help them. And I do help them. And I don't say that out of a sense of ego, just saying it's just wonderful that what Hasidus can do. Um, the first thing I do is I ask them to nominate for me 2 or 3 events in their life, whether they be childhood events or whether they be adult events, where they felt supremely happy, ecstatically so. And they're always able to identify at least 2, 3 such events. Then I take them through a focused meditative exercise to explore that event, like to the extent of what was the weather like, who was there, what were the sounds, what were you wearing, what were the colors, everything. So that the person becomes very familiar with the ins and outs of that particular memory. Then I tell the person, I'd like you to practice it 3 times a day for the next week by simply spending 60 seconds 3 times a day redoing this meditative exercise. At that point, it means that they've got it fairly well embedded in their mind. And I call it a slide. They can actually slide into the projector of their mind. So inevitably, when people wake up 3 in the morning, it's because of anxiousness and worry. It's not because of positive things. So at that moment, you have to drop the new slide in. Now, Hashem created us in a wonderful way, where we can't think of 2 things at the same time. It's impossible. And therefore, if you drop that slide in, you can't think of the negative thing. Now, what you're doing physiologically over a period of 1 month of doing that is you're changing the neurotransmitting pathway in the brain, which previously was highly activated and normalized with negativity, and you're replacing it. And slowly the negative pathway begins to fade, and the new positive one takes over. And that one doesn't affect your sleep, because you are become less and less worried as a person by the continuous flow of the positivity. Now, it's very hard to, in a shortness of time, to fully explore that, but the result is that you slowly begin to be able to sleep longer and longer and longer, because you're undoing certain activity of the brain. And
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So that sounds a lot like psychology, though. Why is that Hasidus? Like,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
does that relate to Hasidus?
Because I explained to them that the whole notion of being able to create a slide, what is the nature of imagination? What is the nature of dreaming? What is it that the mind is doing? And the mind is made up of these 3 elements. And I explained to them what Chochmah, Bina, and Das is, and how to be able to allocate more and more time to one as opposed to the other as needed, so that they understand then that when they're actually dropping the slide in and maintaining it, they've gone through the process of Chochmah Bina and are now focusing on Das. And because they see it then as a system, they are able to believe it better and also understand and practice it better. So the point is, psychology is a big word. Hasidus is able to explain a lot of what you would call psychology in its own model with its own theoretical, but also I'm very confident because it's Torah, so it's actually
Mm.
true. So if you line up
Mm.
all different psychologies, really it's which one is closer to the truth. Well, I'm
Right.
talking truth, so it's really very good.
It's
It's
not a
speaking
theory.
to
It's
soul.
it's reality.
Yeah, it's the real McCoy.
Right. 100%. Wow. That's very interesting. You've do you feel that you've helped your own personal anxiety because through Hasidus, through the teachings of Hasidus? Do you feel that you're
Uh,
not any more anxious at all?
um, I'd say 1,000%. I don't think I ever was a terribly anxious person. I was an angry person in my youth, but I don't think I was an anxious person. I don't think that's ever been a real problem for me.
So
Um,
what was your big what would you say is your was your biggest struggle or is your biggest struggle?
um, my biggest struggle is um, being able to catch myself enjoying life for the wrong reasons, which
Mhm.
means, oh, I enjoy this food. Um, I'm enjoying this company of this person. I'm enjoying this trip. Now, you'll say, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with what I've just said. But there is, if you go into it subtly, why are you enjoying it? Are you enjoying it because of self gratification at one end of the spectrum? Or are you enjoying because of contribution?
Mhm.
Am I eating this wonderful ice cream? And a I have a soft spot for ice cream, especially if it's chocolate and mint. What am I doing it? Is it because I'm recognizing that Hashem is able to create within the world tastes for my taste buds to recognize the beauty of creation? Or am I doing it because I'm thoroughly egotistically enjoying the taste at the moment for my own pleasure?
Mhm.
So it's
Mm.
catching yourself in points of consciousness to recognize that our purpose in life is a mission of contribution. And the pleasureful aspect is really a wonderful bonus and byproduct, but not the main thing.
Hmm. So it's being mindful when you're doing of what you're
Yeah,
doing and
yeah, it's
directing it,
yes.
redirecting it in a positive way. Wow.
And then perhaps going beyond redirecting by actually living it without even the need to redirect it because you've
Mm.
done it.
Mhm. And have you seen that that has happened in your life?
Yes,
Like, have you
certainly.
mastered it?
No, no, I can't say I've mastered it. I catch myself in
Right.
the alternate state, but at least I can catch myself,
Mhm.
which is something which I think 95% of all people don't, because they don't have
Don't, right.
a philosophy or psychology of life that allows them to recognize that.
Mhm. For sure. Wow. So you've been dealing with people for so many years. You've been dealing with students for so many years. You've been dealing with all the different facets of human personality and the things that we that go wrong with it. Have you seen a change in society over the years?
Yes, of course, but not necessarily the result of deeper understanding and deeper learning. I think that happens in small waves amongst small groupings of people. But again, it only takes a small critical mass to be able to affect the totality. So it's not the
Mm.
numbers that concern me. And as we've learned, the Jewish people are Temhama out. You've been the smallest grouping throughout history, and look at the effect that you have on the world down to the present day. That we
Mhm.
still, Jewish people, are at the eye of the storm, and
Mhm.
the smallest country in the world, like Israel, is still the crossroads of invading armies, so to speak. So yes, but the
You're
changes
saying
in the world. Sorry,
no, you're saying that you've seen positive changes through your teachings. Is that what you're saying?
in
Through
groupings,
people's
in
in
small
groups,
individuals and small groupings, etc.
how
But
it's
of
made
course,
a difference.
it's made a huge difference. But not me. It's like it's also uh, synchronous with other Chabadniks doing
Mm.
their thing and creating that interface of a grouping of people in the world who are the small light that produces a lot of light when there's a lot of darkness. So it
Mm.
takes that minimum amount. So yes, of course I've
Mhm.
seen it. Can I see it in world situation? No, there are bigger factors that the Abishter introduces into the world that keep creating changes and flows in the nature of life throughout the centuries, etc. I give a lecture on something called the spiritual genetic code of time, that time itself evolves and has spurts of growth and spurts of decline, like a human being has at times. And that, like at the time of the Baal Shem Tov, was a huge burst of light that suddenly altered the whole nature of the world, uh, um, corresponding to the Industrial Revolution and corresponding to the beginning of scientific method and corresponding to the rise of nationalism, all in that same moment. And therefore, there was the need for the Baal Shem Tov to enter into the world at that time to be able to create for the Jewish peoplehood an approach that would be able to contend with the accelerated change and pace of the world that we're witnessing today, etc.
Mm.
So there are
Mhm.
big factors that alter the scheme of things, but we playing our micro role within that context has an equally important contribution to the outcome.
Right. That's
The butterfly
interesting.
effect.
Right. That's for sure. And have you seen throughout the years that you've been working with people that the challenges have changed in terms of what our youth are facing today?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I hinted at the beginning of our little session, I think that the singular enemy today is media and social media. And I think that everything is ultimately neutral. As the Rebbe teaches, technology is neutral. It's how we utilize it that ultimately creates good or bad. And unfortunately, media and social media is in the hands of people who are only chasing one thing, and that's called profits. And therefore, will use any technique in order to addict people to the screen because they know the psychology of fear. If we can put people in a state of fear, that's regular media, then we'll be stuck glued to the screen. And of course,
Mm.
that's providing a particular vantage point. And the world is now big enough as a global village that you've got market segments that different media can direct itself to and still make a profit at their expense. And then when you have social media, which is all about ego and self and perception, people's perception of self and the like, it's so self oriented that it creates an illness that right and wrong is defined in terms of aesthetic values of how people see you and read you rather than anything intrinsic about you. And that's caused, I mean, the huge rise of anxiousness amongst especially girls,
Mm.
causing, quite apart from suicide and wanting to be terribly thin and even cutting themselves, self harm and the like, which are directly related to this aspect of yeshus and ego, unfortunately. And I think
Mm.
that today is the biggest challenge possible. If I can recommend a book that people should all read by Jonathan Haidt, it's called The Anxious Generation. And The
Mm.
Anxious Generation is a book that brings us out very, very systematically and scientifically, showing what has been happening for the last since 2010 to the present moment, changing the whole orientation of people, especially younger people, because they're still younger in this horrible experiment, and causing the most grievous mental harm possible.
You mean because we're so looking at others for validation, because we're looking for
Yes,
that sense of
yes,
belonging,
yes,
that our
yes,
self-worth is completely gone?
exactly right. A
Mhm.
self, we've handed over self worth into the hands of others rather than self worth being something that emanates from within.
Mhm. And how does Hasidus address that?
Well, simply by, at the very basic, I said simply, but it is simple. At first, the axiomatic proposition that no neshama is brought into the world unless it has something to offer that no other person can offer. No person is redundant in the world. Every person has its mission, his mission, her mission, and has its gift to be able to make their contribution. And once you accept that axiomatically, that everyone has something special to offer, then the specialness comes from within, from the particular neshama you have, rather than people's perception of your external looks or people's perception of your external worth, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
once you begin in training the child to recognize you're important, you're special, and not just because you're my child, but you are objectively special in God's eyes, then that makes a huge difference as it develops and flows through teenagehood.
And what if these teenagers can't see their own gift? What if they can't see their own value? Like, what if they can't
Correct,
see how
correct.
they're giving, like that they have a unique gift? I mean, I've heard
So,
people say like I don't really see what my unique gift is.
absolutely. You see, that's already remedial work. I guess what I was speaking is ideal preparation of the growth of the child. So, if
Mm,
parents themselves are able to model that kind of belief system and behavior, it's very likely to be what their child will have. But so many parents of today, because we're living in the year of 2026, never even have that kind of axiomatic proposition for them to adopt. Their children won't adopt it. I'll give you an
mm,
example before I come back specifically to your question of how do you remedy it. Um, Fathers and mothers come to me and say, my boy's become bar mitzvah, and ever since bar mitzvah, he doesn't come with me to shul. He goes and
mm,
plays.
mm,
All right, so we're living in that kind of laissez-faire world where kids at 13 decide already their future, what they do.
mm,
So I asked the father, what does your son see? What did he see in shul? Did he see you talking to God?
mm,
Did he see facial expressions that demonstrate belief and sincerity in that conversation? Did
mm,
he really believe you that you believed?
mm,
And of course, inevitably, the answer is no. And I go to even modern Orthodox synagogues and lecture there, and it's the same situation. You may call yourself Orthodox, but if you're not speaking to God during davening, why should your child see this as a valuable exercise rather than going playing soccer or football at that time? So it's
mm.
something that has to begin with a parental modeling. But that wasn't your question. Your question is, what do we do now in a generation that doesn't have that, didn't have that? And how do you instill in them that particular quality? The Rebbe quoted me the phrase which is common, Devarim sheyotzim min halev nichnasim el halev.
Mm,
Words from the heart are the ones that enter the heart. If you have the hashgacha pratis, if you have the divine providence to be with an individual and you're counseling them, or you're helping them, you're advising them, make sure that you are speaking from the heart. You're not speaking from the head only. You know, sometimes you get to a counselor or to an advisor, and that person's brilliant and they academically brilliant, and you can see how they've worked it out, but somehow or other, it doesn't
mm,
penetrate to the core of your being. It has to come from the heart as well. And when the person feels your truth and sincerity, their soul hears that and leaves an effect. So if ever I'm with a younger person, like in that kind of a situation, whatever advice I give is no different, but I make sure that I'm speaking from the heart. Now, the youngster will go away, walk away, and I don't see them necessarily immediately changing, but it's left an impression. And one
mm,
impression builds on an impression, builds on an impression, and you give it a possibility. And that's all we can do is create possibilities.
mhm. So really the sincerity is what's so important. The sincerity of when you're speaking, of it being real to you.
you have to believe it yourself. And this is one of the big
Right.
problems. How many people actually believe what they're saying? You know,
Right.
the whole notion of being a teacher in front of a class just to spill out information. Well, as the
Hmm.
Rebbes have always said, it's the teacher's behavior, it's the teacher's tone of voice, it's the teacher's quality of communication that ultimately is what the child is left with, not the information.
Right. For sure. Wow. Very true. Looking back at your life, Rabbi Wolf, what would you feel is your greatest accomplishment of what something that you're so most proud of?
Oh, that's such a hard one. I wish I could point to something. I wish I could point to something very something easily and say, "Hey, look at that! Look at that!" Look, it's true. I don't want to use the word "I'm proud of" because, again, I'm conscious speaking to you that whatever
It's not
person
about your
does,
ego, right?
it's always about, yeah, it's got to be for the other.
Mhm,
So when I see Ballet Tshuva, that I've had a small part in helping them evolve according to their own gifts and their
mm,
own strengths, and see them flowering and later, generation later, producing children that are like them. I can't fail but to gain a little bit of pride in that. But I try to
mhm,
stop myself because, being a chassid and being a shaliach is not about notching up success stories
right,
and statistically adding them. It's, yeah, guess what? That's what Hashem sent you there for. If you don't do that,
right,
you're getting a
right,
minus mark. Okay.
right, right. I guess pride is the wrong word, maybe gratification, that you feel
Yeah.
gratified with
Look,
the
I enjoy being with them. I enjoy with
right,
there's a few that I continue to keep up with that were from my American campus days and who became Ballet Tshuva. One of them spent now 40 years teaching in Ahole Torah, and another one has
mhm,
been a Sefer in Kfar Chabad for those 40 years. Um, and I think of it, isn't that wonderful how Hashem provided these latent gifts in these individuals? And I had a small part in allowing it to wake up.
hmm, definitely. Something very, very beautiful in being a part of that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and my final question to you is there something that you would like listeners to take from this interview? What would be the message that you'd give them?
I think the message is that you are special, you're unique. There isn't a second person like you. Don't underestimate your power. Don't underestimate Hashem's choice of you being in this world, living for the 120 years, because you're essential. Just like a letter of the Torah, if it's, God forbid, not in good shape, affects the whole Torah, you yourself, if you don't live up to the potential that Hashem gave you and believe that Hashem needs you in this world, then you haven't succeeded. Your success story is knowing that you can contribute and everyone can contribute. If you happen to have a Jewish soul, then you have a contribution in one special way as a Jew. And if you have a non Jewish soul, you have a very special contribution in your own unique way. Everything is purposeful, everyone is purposeful. Go out there and make sure that you express your purpose.
Even if you don't really realize how purposeful you are, I guess,
That's
or
right.
how or
Sometimes
your or your unique
yeah.
talent. Right,
So believe me, just believe me. You are talented and you are gifted and you are special.
right. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Wolf. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your
My
wisdom,
pleasure.
continued success in all the work that you're doing and in teaching
Thank
so
you.
many thousands of Jews and non-Jews to find their purpose and their
My
meaning.
pleasure.
Thank you so
Thank you very much
much.
for the opportunity. Lovely to meet you.
You too. Thank you. Wow, when I said that we have a fascinating guest, I really meant it. So many fascinating aspects of Rabbi Laibl Wolf's life, spans so many different interests. I was so interested in this so many different aspects of his life and how he got to where he became. where he influences thousands of people to understand themselves better through the teachings of Hasidus in a very practical way. I was enthralled by his explanation of how the Rebbe told him not to go back to his studies. He really wanted to study, but the Rebbe told him it's time to pursue other things to help. There's a fire that's burning in terms of assimilation, and you're needed. You're needed there. I was also very interested in how he explained the Rebbe's position when his wife wanted to return to Australia. The Rebbe saw her feelings and saw her need to return, and told him he can continue doing his work in that area. His visit with the Dalai Lama was very intriguing, how the Dalai Lama specifically wanted to ask him for how the Jewish people exist in exile and how we have Jewish life, which is really such an aspect of the Jewish people that was fascinating to somebody like the Dalai Lama. I really liked how he explained as well the way that we can see Hasidus as this vertical, teaching us how to go deeper into ourselves and to use different parts of ourselves like a symphony, using different aspects of our personality and understanding it better. And the way that he explained the anxiety and how we can remove that anxiety from ourselves. And the self-worth, that was another big one that I really appreciated, because that's something so big in today's society. And that was, of course, his final message, that we all have a purpose and we all have a specific, unique purpose that is unique to ourselves, and to embrace that. I'm wondering which part of this interview you enjoyed, which part of this fascinating personality of Rabbi Laibl Wolf you related to, and which aspect of his growth you personally took to heart. I'd love to hear in the comments below. Please let us know. We read every single comment, so drop us a like, drop us some feedback. We love to hear your comments, and we love to hear how you were affected by the people in the interviews. Thank you so much for watching. If you are not subscribed, please make sure that you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. You can catch us as well on all podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. Give us a like there, share it with a friend who might be interested in listening to this interview. Thank you so much again for watching and for being a part of this extraordinary community.